Something about that detail landed differently the moment it surfaced. Not the split itself, that had already settled into the public conversation like a quiet aftershock, but the quiet presence of someone offering comfort in the middle of it. A blonde woman in her 40s, a relationship counsellor, said to have been drawing closer to Eamonn Holmes in the months surrounding the end of his long marriage to Ruth Langsford. Viewers who had watched the pair for years on daytime television suddenly found themselves holding a different kind of image, not the familiar on-screen chemistry, but the private space where one person reaches for steadiness when everything familiar begins to shift. You could almost feel the collective pause. For so long Eamonn and Ruth had been part of the morning rhythm for countless households. Their shared history stretched across decades, across studios, across the small ordinary moments that television somehow makes feel intimate. When the news of their separation arrived, many people watching felt the weight of that history. And then came this further layer, the suggestion that comfort had already begun to arrive in the form of someone whose professional life centers on helping others navigate sadness, separation, and the slow unraveling of what once felt permanent. Some audiences began wondering whether the timing itself carried its own emotional charge. While nothing has been confirmed about the precise nature of that friendship in those early days, the idea of it seemed to touch a nerve. What stayed with many was the human paradox at the center. Here was a man publicly acknowledging a difficult chapter, thanking viewers for their support, while reports suggested he had already found a quiet ally whose work involves guiding people through exactly this kind of terrain. There is something almost cinematic in that contrast. The public face of gratitude and composure, and beneath it the quieter possibility of someone offering the kind of steady listening that counseling is built on. Viewers online interpreted the exchange of support as both understandable and unexpectedly sharp. After all, when a relationship of nearly 3 decades reaches its end, the need for consolation is not surprising. What unsettled some was the particular shape that consolation appeared to take. It is worth sitting with the atmosphere those reports created. Television audiences had grown used to watching Eamonn and Ruth move through the world with a certain shared language. The glances, the easy banter, the sense that they understood each other's rhythms. Suddenly the frame widened. A friendship that had reportedly begun years earlier through a simple social media exchange had, according to those close to the situation, deepened in the period leading up to the split. Trips, shared experiences, the kind of thoughtful gestures that signal care. Many who followed the story felt a complicated mix of sympathy and protectiveness. Sympathy for two people navigating the end of something significant. Protectiveness toward the public image of a partnership that had once felt so solid on screen. And then there is the counselor herself. The detail that she specializes in helping people cope with feeling sad, with the practical and emotional work of separation, added another layer of resonance. Some people watching felt a quiet irony in it. Others simply recognized the very human tendency to seek understanding from those who already speak the language of heartbreak. It almost seemed as though the story was holding up a mirror to something larger than one couple's private ending, the way we all reach for steadiness when the ground shifts, and how complicated that reaching can look from the outside. What made the moment linger was not any single revelation, but the way it invited viewers to consider the space between public narratives and private needs. Ruth, by many accounts, had been processing the crumbling of the marriage in her own way. The discovery that comfort was already present elsewhere appeared, to some, to turn quiet sadness into something sharper. That shift in emotional temperature is what many remembered. Not the headline, but the sense that an already difficult chapter had acquired an unexpected new contour. Television has always thrived on the tension between what is shown and what remains just out of frame. In this case, the frame opened a little wider than usual. Audiences who had grown fond of the familiar morning presence of Eamonn and Ruth found themselves confronted with the quieter reality that even the most watched lives contain rooms the cameras never enter. Some began asking whether the very public nature of their work had made the private ending feel more exposed. Others simply sat with the ordinary human truth that endings rarely arrive cleanly, and that the search for consolation can look different to every person involved. Perhaps what continues to hold attention is not the speculation itself, but the recognition it prompts. Long relationships leave deep grooves. When those grooves are interrupted, the need for understanding is almost universal. That a relationship counselor might become part of that landscape feels, in one light, entirely natural. In another light, it carries the weight of timing and perception. Viewers keep returning to the story because it sits at the intersection of familiarity and surprise, the familiar faces of daytime television, and the unexpected emotional architecture that sometimes forms beneath the surface. In the end, maybe what stayed with so many was not any single reported detail, but the quiet reminder that even people who have spent years guiding conversations on air still need someone to listen when the conversation turns inward. And perhaps that is why moments like this continue to spark conversation long after the initial reports fade. They invite us to notice the delicate, complicated ways people seek steadiness when the life they once shared begins to change shape.